everybody. Welcome back to Maker's Bar. I'm your host, Troy Goldenberg, here at Maker's Bar, we're trying to create 1 million leaders. I'm here with one of them today. His name is Jake Broe. He is a former United States Air Force member. He was in charge of nuclear and missile operations office when he was there, or a part of the office when he was there. Today, he is hosting his own YouTube channel with over 500,000 followers and subscribers. His videos get about over 100,000, hundreds of thousands, in fact, views per episode. Very excited to be speaking with him and learning about his journey today. Jake, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for inviting me on, Troy.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was happy to come across you on X or on Twitter, whatever you call it here. And the way that I usually start these conversations is, hey, what's your story? You can start that from childhood. You can start that from your military service, from school, wherever you want to begin that story.
Well, with my YouTube channel currently, I'm networking and communicating with people all over the world all the time, but it's nice to talk to you. I know you're based out of Chicago, and I'm from Milwaukee. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My sister currently lives in Chicago. So going back to the beginning, I guess, I graduated with a bachelor's in geology and political science from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. It's close to the Twin Cities, Minnesota. And I graduated in 2008, which wasn't a fantastic time to graduate. The unemployment with the great 2008 recession, shot up to like 9 or 10%. So I had a friend from university who had already been teaching English in South Korea for 2 years. And he sold me on the idea of um, going to South Korea to teach English in a public school. So this was 2009. I had taken the LSAT. I was considering going to law school. I was kind of burnt out on being a professional student. So I wanted to travel. I wanted to get some international experience. And I thought this was a good opportunity. Upon arriving in South Korea, I absolutely fell in love with the place. I fell in love with the culture and the people. And I ended up staying there too long. I ended up staying there 6 years.
Oh,
So
wow.
by the time I turned 30, I said to myself, well, either I'm an ESL teacher for the rest of my life, or I have to move back to America and figure out what's next. It was at this point that I decided to join the Air Force. If you've already earned your bachelor's degree, you can go through officer training school at Maxwell Air Force Base to commission directly as an officer. If you're not familiar with the structure of the military, an enlisted person, you can join at 18. You don't need a college degree. For an officer, more or less, they're kind of like the managers or the specialty career fields for the military. And I didn't have anything specifically in mind. When I went to the recruiter, I basically said whatever the needs of the Air Force. I don't have any preference. I put on they call it the dream sheet. What do you want to be when you join the Air Force? I put space, I put cybersecurity, I put intelligence, and then they ignored that, and I kind of was expecting them to. And they told me I was going to be a nuclear and missile operations officer. And I didn't know what that was. So I had to figure it out once I showed up at Maxwell Air Force Base. OTS was about 11 or 12 weeks. And then they sent me to Vandenberg Air Force Base out in California. This is west of Santa Barbara. And I ended up staying there for about 2 years, waiting for a top secret security clearance in order to start my professional development to be in charge of the nation's nuclear weapons. While I was waiting for a security clearance, I did a variety of things at Vandenberg. I was in the base legal office for a little bit. I was then in the maintenance section, and I got to be part of the operations for the 576 test flight squadron. These are the people who do 4 test launches a year for the Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile system. I wasn't certified to touch anything or be in charge of anything, but because I was a second lieutenant waiting to start my professional development, they wanted me doing something productive with my future career field. So by the time I got into school and by the time I graduated, the tech school at Vandenberg was about 6 months of intense training, how to be a missileer. That was my job. They then sent me to North Dakota. Minot, it's close to the Canadian border. And then I spent the next 4 years there. And over the course of 4 years, I spent over 300 days underground in a launch control capsule. This is the Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile system. This is the land leg of the nuclear triad for the United States nuclear deterrence, the other two legs being bombers and subs. So the subs, the nuclear subs, belong to the Navy. Bombers and ICBMs belong to the Air Force. And I did that for 4 years, sleeping on a shelf underground, eating cafeteria food, um, conducting 24-hour shifts in a launch control capsule where it has 3 feet thick concrete walls. So when I went to work, I was in primary custody of about 10 nuclear weapons, 10 silos, but I had status monitoring up to 50. This gets us now to about the year 2000. Let's see here. 2019 is when I started my YouTube channel. I was stuck in Minot, North Dakota. I was looking for something to do in my spare time. It was around this time that I was following a YouTuber named Graham Stephan, and he made a video titled "How to Get Your First 1,000 Subscribers on YouTube." So I was a captain in the Air Force, doing the same thing over and over. It was getting kind of boring and monotonous, stuck in this small town in North Dakota. And I just wanted to challenge myself. And the goal initially was just, can I get monetized? Can I start making a couple bucks a day?
Mhm.
And by the end of the month, who knows? I've got enough for a nice dinner out. And I enjoyed it. I think my personality type, I've always played video games and I've always gravitated towards games where like you want to optimize your stats and your metrics and you want to level up and you want to like, complete skill trees and nonsense like that. So as soon as I got into the YouTube channel and the YouTube analytics and I realized it was basically a game, it was fun. And
Yeah.
it helped me connect with people. It took 6 months for me to get monetized. Over the course of 6 months, I had to upload 60 original videos in order to hit the watch hour requirement, 4,000 watch hours and 1,000 subscribers. But as soon as I was making like a couple bucks a day, I was addicted. I was hooked. I was going to work, but I was thinking about YouTube. What do I want to do to talk about my next video? And in the beginning, because I was watching all these financial YouTubers, I decided that could be my niche. I tried making YouTube videos about finance topics related to military members. So I made a bunch of videos talking about credit cards and checking accounts and banks only for military members, USAA, Penn Fed, Navy Federal. There wasn't a lot of good information on YouTube talking about these banks because you have to be a military member or their family in order to have access. So there just wasn't a large pool of creators that could make this content. I also made a series of videos talking about the government TSP. This is the government's thrift savings plan or the government's 401k. There's about 6 million members. You know, everybody who works at the post office or anybody who works in government or the military, they all have the option to contribute to their TSP, like a corporate 401k. I made a series of those videos. I then started broadening and broadening. And by the time COVID happens, there was the stock market crash and crypto started blowing up and going crazy. So I was trying to cover all these various topics. And I reached a point where I was making more from YouTube than I was from the Air Force. Like I was still doing the Air Force full
Mhm.
time, serving with honor. But once I was making more from YouTube than my military job, I was no longer a Miss Lear, an Air Force captain with a side hustle as a YouTuber. I was a YouTuber with a side hustle as an Air Force captain. So it was at that point that I decided I was going to separate. I gave my notice and I served for another year. My service commitment was 3 years, but I ended up staying for 4. And it was a huge leap. It was a big, like, am I
Yeah.
actually going to succeed trying to do this full time? With the Air Force, I have guaranteed health insurance. I have guaranteed income. I know what to expect. But with YouTube, it's all performance based. And if for some reason the algorithm or if YouTube just decides they don't want to pay people anymore, Facebook doesn't pay anybody to post on their platform. So it was a risk, but it ended up paying off. I separated in February of 2022, which just happened to be the same month that Russia launched their full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And it was the top news story in the world, and I just made a video giving my thoughts and reactions, and that video got 3 times as many views as my normal finance-related content. How it works with the YouTube AdSense pay is how much you make depends on your viewer, not so much your views. You want to get as many views as you can, but advertisers pay more for certain kinds of viewers, younger viewers with more disposable income, Americans, because these are American companies mostly advertising. They want an American view is more valuable than a view from, for example, Tanzania or something. So I was kind of like doing the math in my head, like what if I started talking about, the war in Ukraine, dedicated to this? I had a background. I didn't mention this, but I did earn a master's degree in international relations from the University of Nebraska Omaha while I was serving, and I finished up my first year in 2022. So I had the background, I had the expertise, I also had the interest, and I'm no fan of the Russians. So there was a couple months where I was kind of transitioning between talking about finance and then talking about the war. But within 3 months, my YouTube channel blew up and went from 80,000 subscribers to 160. And I realized more people were subscribed to me and watching me because they wanted updates about what was happening with Russia and Ukraine, as opposed to me talking about trading options or, credit card bonus rewards.
Hmm.
So I transitioned to talking about Russia and Ukraine full time, and that was 2.5 years ago. And I'm still doing it. And my YouTube channel is currently over 500,000 subscribers, and I've had a lot of podcast guests, and I've appeared on other channels, a lot of amazing opportunities. And I don't have a manager. I don't have any employees. I don't have anybody working with me or telling me what to do. I have to find the will and initiative every day to wake up and keep producing content, keep posting, keep engaging with people. And I'm incredibly blessed to be my own boss and to be experiencing success on multiple platforms. But I don't know where this is going. I don't have a map here. So how
Yeah,
this plays out over
most don't.
time,
Most don't. Yeah.
I can't tell you, and I'm not going to even try and predict. But that pretty much is my story up till this point in time.
No, it's a great story, man. There's overlap. So this Maker's Bar, like my story here, um, I started out as a vending machine guy, and I sold the vending machine company when I moved away from Kansas City, and I started a vending machine podcast. I noticed there weren't any out there, and I came across people like Joe Rogan, who was like, "Oh, I didn't know you could make money talking to people. This is amazing." And that kind of transitioned into I talk with investors, and that kind of transitioned into an opportunity here with Maker's Bar, to be a part of a group and see what we can build here. And it was mostly business focused, and my kind of political interest was in the background. Um, just kind of had my own Twitter account, and once kind of October 7th happened in Israel, I had a friend there who got killed, and just family living there. Like it was a topic that I was like very well researched in, and just had these offline conversations a lot. Um, and that kind of led me into more political conversations here as well. And whether it's the political conversations or the business conversations, and this one's kind of merging into both here, there's an overlap in how people kind of get to where they are. It's kind of one foot in front of the other. There's not really a plan. There's a little success here. There's a little, intrigue that turns into, an addiction almost, as you mentioned. And you just kind of get step by step to where you are, and you find your place inside this content machine. Um, and from what I've seen, you've found your place, and you're doing very valuable, good work. And on that note, I do want to talk to you about. Um, I eventually do want to circle back into like the nukes and like you being in charge of those. It's a very unique thing, but I do want to talk about kind of the content machine, or the culture around Ukraine, Russia, from your perspective, because it's shifted so much to a dramatic degree. This isn't a topic that I would by any means call myself an expert on, Um, but in 2022, I felt very aligned with the entire country that Ukraine was a victim here, and Russia was the aggressor. And over the course of the last 3 years, the culture, the talk of the discourse has just like shifted completely to the point of people like yourself can't even. I mean, someone like you who has all these followers should be able to get on these big podcasts without a problem. They can't even find themselves given a chance inside the larger discourse.
I've reached out
Yeah.
to Graham Stephan at the Iced Coffee Hour. I reached out to Tom Billio of Impact Theory. I've reached out to Lex Friedman and Joe Rogan, but I don't realistically think I'm big enough to get on their shows. But yeah, there's this really weird shift that's been occurring, and it's politically driven from the narrative coming from people who support incoming President Trump, uh, and there's just a I think for liberals or Democrats right now, especially, they just feel overwhelmed and defeated. They got crushed. They got crushed. MAGA controls all three branches of government. I don't want this discussion to become political in nature, but
Hmm.
you can't talk about war without politics.
Yeah.
There is nothing more political in this world than the act of war. For people in the comment section, they say, Jake, don't talk about politics, just talk about the war. Well, I respond to them, that's a luxury. That's a luxury. When you see the political unrest happening right now in Syria, or the political unrest happening now in Georgia, the, what's happening potentially with this election in Romania or the election last month in Moldova, whether or not people die, whether or not people go to war, depends on politicians and elections. For a lot of people in the United States, they're insulated, and it's a luxury. If you don't have to pay attention to politics, you're blessed. You're living a good life. I'm sorry, but whatever you've done to get in a position where you don't care who becomes the most powerful man in the country, bravo to you. You're living a very comfortable lifestyle, apparently, where you don't care if things get worse or better, depending on who wins a national election. So that's the point I wanted to make. But why don't
Yeah.
you follow up with your
Um,
question?
no, you're good. Again, open-ended conversation here, so we can go wherever you like. But I was curious to see like how have you seen this discourse change, and what do you think caused it? So you kind of already touched on it. Was it? So my mind it isn't there's a faction of media that has ended up being pro-Trump, and part of this MAGA movement. But in my mind, it wasn't a MAGA-led media movement. So do you disagree with that? Do you think that's what?
What
'Cause like, yeah.
what this war should be about. We should be talking about the need to promote democracy. The more democracies there are in the world, the more peaceful the world will be. Dictators are the ones who kill their own people with impunity, the ones who attack their neighbors and try to steal their resources. I understand the United States is not perfect. The United States has made mistakes in the past, but how many wars has Germany started since it became a democracy? How many wars has Denmark started since it became a democracy? Generally, when you have elected officials who are responsible to their people, you don't spend money on tanks and attack planes. You spend money on healthcare and education. That's what ordinary people want when they don't feel threatened. Obviously, when a democracy feels threatened, things can escalate or change very abruptly. So, this war, when we're talking about it, it should be about democracy. It should be about human rights. It should be about international law and defending the international rules based order that we've all benefited from since World War II ended in 1945. The generation that remembers what the age of empires was like prior to World War II, they're dead. I mean, they're all 102, 105, or whatever. People don't remember how stupid it was and how bad it was when we had all these competing empires: the Ottoman Empire, the Austro Hungarian Empire, the Russian Empire, the British Empire. And these empires would just fight with each other over mountains and hills and lakes that they claimed were theirs. It was stupid. When you sit in a seat of power and you're not going to die, your kids aren't going to die, it's easy to just send them off to the battlefield because it's your ego, it's your reputation, it's your legacy on the line. When we shouldn't have monarchs. We shouldn't have autocrats. We shouldn't have dictators. We should have term limited elected officials that serve for 4, 8, maybe even 10 years, and then they go away. Just please, just go away sometimes. So the war should be using these language, but I've already shifted on my channel. I'm convinced a majority of Americans don't care and are not persuaded by the correct arguments. They're persuaded by dollar amounts. They're persuaded. It's a winning argument for MAGA to say, why are we spending hundreds of billions of dollars to defend and support Ukraine? Just let Russia win. Who cares if people die? Who cares if Russia takes Kharkiv or Kyiv or Odessa? Russia used to control this 100 years ago anyways. It used to belong to their empire. Just let them have it back. I could go through, the gauntlet of
So
arguments of why this is
yeah,
bad for the United States. But
actually,
if
I
you're
would love
just,
for you to hear that. I would love to hear that. But sorry, finish your statement then.
but in a 30-second or 60-second soundbite, an attack on, a TikTok video or an Instagram reel, you can reach people. You can say, why are American tax dollars being wasted on this forever war? Shut it down, end it. It's stupid. I don't care what's happening in Eastern Europe. That's what you're feeling and experiencing right now. The more detailed, longer, complicated argument is we have over 1 million American citizens living in the European Union. The European Union is our largest trading partner. If Russia attacks the European Union or NATO country next, the United States military under Article 5 obligations is duty bound to protect them and intervene, and that will be America's direct involvement in a war. It's also bad for America's economy. If chunks of the EU are being gobbled up by a kleptocratic mafia state, that's what Vladimir Putin is. So this is bad for Americans. It's bad for the American economy. And US soldiers will be dying next if Ukraine can't hold. If Russia can absorb 40 million people and trillions of dollars of untapped resources back into their empire forever, then when they start the next war in 2, 4, 6, 10 years from now, whenever, they're going to be stronger and they're going to be more difficult to defeat when it's American soldiers fighting that war. It's inevitable. It will happen because Putin is an internationally wanted war criminal by the ICC now. There is no rejoining the G8s. There is no attending the Olympics in London or wherever it's being held next. Vladimir Putin is never returning to New York City for a UN General Assembly. He's an international wanted war criminal for the rest of his life. And when he dies in 15 or 20 years and someone else replaces him, spoilers, that guy is also going to be an internationally wanted war criminal. So the Russians have gone down this irreversible path. And it's naivete for anyone in America to say, just let the Russians win. It's not our problem, blah, blah, blah. Let's just do America first. We live in a global society. We benefit from globalization. We are dependent on markets in the Middle East. If Ukraine is gobbled up, 50% of all the food exports that go to Africa come out of Ukraine. That's now Russia's territory. That's now Russia's grain. Russia now has a choke point where they can cut off the food supply to Africa if African nations don't do what they want. The Russians have already demonstrated they're willing to use their natural resources as a leverage point in negotiations for political arguments. Give us these concessions, give us this territory, overthrow your own government and put the guy we want in charge. Otherwise, we'll cut off your gas, the Nord Stream pipeline. Otherwise, we'll cut off oil shipments. Otherwise, we'll cut off food supplies. Otherwise, we'll cut off uranium exports. The Russians will weaponize every aspect of their economy to leverage democratic nations into submission, capitulation, appeasement. This is never going to stop unless we end it today, and we've never had a better opportunity. We've never had a better opportunity by just giving old equipment to the Ukrainians to fight this war. The Russians on the battlefield are corrupt and incompetent. You can get out the ruler and measure how far they've gone in the Donbass region. Hundreds of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers killed and wounded, and they've advanced about 30 kilometers in the Donbass region over 3 years. It's pathetic. Daily attacks every single day, horrendous losses, and they've gone 30 kilometers in 3 years. Russia can never win this war unless we just give up support for Ukraine and allow Russia to win this war.
So that's there's a couple points of pushback I could provide from the American perspective. So I first off, let me just reveal my bias. I haven't already with you. Like I'm with you. Um, I think this is a very simple moral, logistical, economical, everything is very simple in my mind that we should be supporting Ukraine. I haven't really fully understood the shift in American culture, but to play their advocate for a second, I think something the Americans do care about is 100% the financial thing. That like the TikTok thing you mentioned, the 60 seconds. That's what you hear when I talk to my friends, people that aren't online and part of this discourse, just living their lives. Like, oh, we just shouldn't be involved. This isn't our problem. And the other thing though that I would push back on you on is they do hate hearing the number of deaths. Um, this is one of the things with Hamas and kind of their strategy that when they fight Israel is they work to not kind of they work to increase the total number of deaths because that works on the Western audience, on the American audience. So when we hear millions of dead in Ukraine and Russia, that is something that makes we just want war to end. We just want this whole thing to end. Just let them say, hey, let's carve up Ukraine a little bit. Let Russia keep what they have, and it all stops. And um, my response is, I don't think Russia stops. Why do you think Russia stops? I think they retool for 2 or 4 years down the road and just do it again. Um, is that the proper response to that, or what is your thoughts when you hear that objection? It's like we just want people to stop dying.
We just want people to stop dying means we just want people to stop fighting. But there are things in this world that are worth fighting for, are worth dying for. One of the founding mottos of our nation is live free or die. I think it's still the official state motto of New Hampshire or something like that. Live free or die. So, what is Russia offering the people of Ukraine if they take their cities, take their countries, take their people? And Vladimir Putin is a dictator who has been in power for 25 years. He's going to be ruler for life, and he's going to handpick his selector. The quality of life for the average Russian is not very good. This is something that has horrified and shocked me. I mean, you see the propaganda and how nice it is in Moscow and St. Petersburg, but leave the two model cities where the ruling elites, the top 10%, live, and Russia's not a very nice place. You actually look at the statistics of how many Russians don't have indoor plumbing, what kind of healthcare, quality of life, education is the average Russian getting? And this is not what the people of Ukraine want. They don't want to become a subordinate vassal state comparable to Belarus today. Look at the diverging paths of Belarus and Poland after the fall of the Berlin Wall. When the Eastern Bloc fell, when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, you had two paths. You either stayed close to the Kremlin and participated in their policies and their economic models, or you looked to the West and you joined NATO, you joined the EU, and you had real democratic and capitalist reforms. It's no contest. The people of Ukraine look at the Baltics, they look at Poland, they see their economy, their quality of life, every metric you can look at, triple, quadruple over the last 30, 40 years. That's what they want. They want real, responsive, corrupt-free government. And you can't maintain the Russian system today without corruption. Corruption is not a bug, it's a feature. Putin knows his generals are corrupt. He knows his governors are corrupt. He knows his mayors are corrupt. And it has to be that way to maintain their loyalty. When you, the head of the country, are a criminal, Elon Musk said this himself. Vladimir Putin is the richest man in the world. You don't become the richest man in the world on a presidential salary in Russia. You become the richest man in the world by stealing the wealth of the country, taxpayer dollars, robbing the people, not building that hospital, not building that airport, not building that bridge, and just keeping the money for yourself so you can have illegitimate children and mega yachts and villas in Italy or whatever. So all of these governors and mayors and generals engage in corruption so that they will defend the system. This is how Putin buys his loyalty. Governors, politicians, generals, admirals are not going to rebel against him if they're complicit in the crime of the state. If they've engaged in corruption and they know they're a criminal, and if for some reason Putin regimes collapses, they now could be held accountable if there's real democratic reform in the country. This is why all the power players up and down the chain of commands fight to defend the system, because they're all complicit in the crime. They know they are. Ukraine doesn't want this model anymore. They want real economic growth. They want real economic security and prosperity. And I just don't think they like the Russians. After 300 years of Russification, genocide, outlawing their language, oppressing their people, there's no love. All of the propaganda, the Soviet propaganda of Slavic brotherhood or nonsense, the Ukrainians have never liked the Russians. The Russians have never treated the Ukrainians well. They want a permanent divorce. They just need a little more help, and they can finally be free after Russian dominion for 300 years.
On that perfect. On that note, um, my next objection point that I get from my friends or I'm seeing online all the time is Ukraine can't win this war. And this was actually something that, again, knowing nothing about this, come 2022, February 2022, when I saw like, oh, they're going to be in Kyiv in 3 days, and every single expert that I listened to that I could find was this is over in 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, 6 months. This is definitely going to be over by winter because of the pipeline, the gas that Russia has, is selling to Europe, which seemed to be like the furthest out I could find at the time of when this would be over. Everyone was wrong, and today you'll still hear, well, Ukraine can't win, and in my mind, like a week or two ago now, um, it kind of it bumps its head with another talking point of, uh, well, they just sent a missile into Russian territory and they're attacking Russia for the first time now, um, and this is what caused the Joe Rogans and other famous voices to say, "Don't do this. What are you doing, Ukraine? Stop winning. Stop trying to win." Basically, and these two talking points come up again and again, though, and they're not really seeming to understand how they contradict one another. So you're saying, hey, Ukraine can win. They just need a little bit of help. Well, what is that path to victory? How can they win? And why have all these experts been wrong on this topic of, hey, Ukraine can't win? Because at this point, I'm fully convinced, hey, you're just wrong. Ukraine can clearly win this war. I assume you agree with me there. Am I correct? And why is that the case?
Well, I said this 3 years ago on my channel, the first week of the war. Russia invaded with a invasion force of 200,000 soldiers. And how the heck are 200,000 soldiers supposed to conquer and subdue a country of 40 million people actively resisting? In the first couple of weeks, people were making Molotov cocktails and, slingshots. They were going to fight them with sticks. Like, you can't conquer a country of 40 million people with only an invasion force of 200,000. So that was my first reaction. And this was the plan from the Russians. Look tough, look scary, make threats, and then just drive your tanks into Kyiv and expect nobody to resist you. The Russians thought that they could take Kyiv in 3 days because there would be no resistance. And there might have been certain areas of the map that are kind of iffy or questionable. How are the Russians able to take the city of Kherson, 300,000 people, for example, so fast? So there might have been some collaboration on the inside to help the Russians take cities or get in, but it got shut down pretty fast. And all of Russia's failings, there's a propaganda narrative, like a goodwill gesture to withdraw, or we were in talks with Turkey and then the Ukrainians double crossed us. When really Russia's just been incompetent this entire time. The corruption has been so rampant and widespread, they just didn't have what they needed to actually fight this war, really for the first year and a half. When you look at what territory they controlled, Russia's been going in reverse. They had to retreat from Sumy and Chernihiv. They had to give up on taking Kyiv. Then they got their asses kicked in Kharkiv, September of 2022, and Ukraine liberated over like 5,000 square kilometers worth of territory. Then by November of 2022, they took the north bank of the Dnipro River. retaking the city of Kherson. That was Russia's biggest victory, and they lost that. They lost Snake Islands. The Black Sea Fleet headquarters got blown up by a Storm Shadow missile. The Russian Navy can't even use the port city of Sevastopol. They've completely withdrawn to the Sea of Azov or Novorossiysk. So it's been failure after failure after failure, but the Russian propaganda machine is just so effective at spinning it. Oh, we meant to do that. We meant to lose that. For somebody like me, paying attention to this war every single day, this is all nonsense. Like, it's laughably stupid how incompetent and cartoonishly bad at this war the Russians are. But for the average person who, you know, watches football and listens to good music and spends time with their kids, when you see that clip of Joe Rogan saying, F you, Zelensky, F you, people of Ukraine, I don't want to risk World War III, just give the Russians what they want. Well, this can knee-jerk panic a lot of people, and I'm doing my best as just one person. There's so many fantastic people out there like General Ben Hodges or author Timothy Schneider or Gary Kasparov trying to make themselves available to give the counter narrative. But if I'm being honest, there's just so many uninformed people that don't understand what's really happening. And voices like mine, sadly, just can't reach enough people consistently to counter the Kremlin megaphone that permeates through every platform and has affected so many people. It's just human nature. Once people form an opinion on something, it's really hard to get them to change their opinion. It's oftentimes who reaches them first. Whoever reaches a person who hasn't formed an opinion, once they form that opinion, it's really hard to get them to flip it because they have to have that internal conversation and admit that their thinking in the past was wrong. So I'm not going to give up trying to reach people. We can talk about my personal motivation, and I don't want nuclear war with the Russians. That would recall me back to active duty and service. I'd be like the first person called if a nuke ever went off. This is the scenario that I'm trying to prevent. So there's a personal motivation here for me
So yeah,
to not.
what is your motivation? What does, like, beyond just YouTube, beyond just the intrigue, what is the motivation here?
People ask, why don't I make videos talking about Israel and Hamas, or why don't I make videos talking about other parts of the world? And it's because I don't identify these people with what I've my knowledge about Ukraine prior to February 2022 is pretty minimal. I just didn't know anything about the culture, the history, the people, whatever. And then as I started learning more and more, you're not going to find a more pro-American country in the world right now than Ukraine. Ukraine is desperate for the United States to continue supporting them and helping them. We're our best chance at finally breaking free of Russian dominion forever. Uh, and as an American, I want to be proud of my country. I want to believe that we're doing real positive and good in the world. When you see all the war crimes and atrocities that the Russians have committed and what they're planning to do if they take cities like Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, and Odessa, the spare capacity of military power by the United States as a fraction of our military budget or government budget or our GDP is nothing to do some real good in the world and help these 40 million people finally be free, finally be democratic, finally be prosperous. Why would anybody be opposed to this? I understand the argument. There's homeless people in San Francisco. Why are we sending money to Ukraine? And I'm skeptical that we're going to solve the homeless problem in San Francisco over the next 4 years. But this is what we built our military to do. This is what we should be doing with our tax dollars that we're spending on the military anyways. I've made the argument that the Russians are not going to use a nuclear weapon. There's no benefit to using a nuclear weapon anywhere in the world for the Russians, which is why the last 3 years they've not used one, which is why no rational state actor the last 75 years has used one. There's no benefits, only consequences if you use a nuclear weapon. Let's just finish the Russians off today. Let's just finish it. Let's not undo our victory in the Cold War. That's not putting America first. That's not making America great again, returning to a multipolar world in which the Kremlin dominates Central Asia, dominates the Black Sea and the Caspian, dominates Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. Why would we want to roll back the clock and give Putin what he wants, returning to the status quo of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, where there was this rival superpower constantly threatening us? I don't want to see that world come back.
I'm with you. I think it's naivete of the isolationist types, and I think that's more so what it is versus flat out pro Putin, pro Kremlin. At least that's a mask for a lot of people, and um, they think, hey, if we leave Russia alone, Russia will leave us alone, and I've never seen evidence for that.
Russia's never going to leave us alone. We are Russia's blood enemy for the next century or so. And this is how we need to think of it. It doesn't matter how we got to this point. If you want to hate Jake Sullivan and hate Joe Biden and hate the Democrats for what they've done the last 3 years, fine. But it doesn't change the fact that American weapons donated to Ukraine in the hands of Ukrainian soldiers have killed and wounded hundreds of thousands of Russian troops. The children, the brothers and sisters, the parents, the family members of these hundreds of thousands of Russian men who have been killed or wounded the last 3 years, they know who sent the weapons. These people hate us, and they're going to hate us for the rest of your life and the rest of my life. We can either lift up on the gas, pull back on the gas, and let Ukraine fall to the Russians and empower Russia, knowing they hate us, or we can continue supporting Ukraine, give them a little bit extra, finish off the Russians today, and then not have this threat against you and me and our children for the next century. The Russians are being very careful with their language today, but just think about it. Hundreds of thousands of Russian men the last 3 years have been killed by American weapons. These people are never going to forgive us. They're never going to forget what happened. Russia is our enemy until we defeat them. This is the language we need to be using.
What does defeat look like for them? What does victory look like for Ukraine?
We need the Putin regime to collapse. We need some kind of economic or political collapse. And for people telling me that's not possible, I'm sorry, but based on all historical precedents, Russia is the most likely country in the world to collapse. They collapsed in 1991 and they collapsed in 1918. Russia's geography sucks. It's really hard transporting stuff. It's really hard organizing their people when it's dark and cold and arid and barren. Russia, for 500 years, has been trying to expand to nicer areas that are more pleasant to live in, which is Ukraine, which is the Black Sea coast, which is Odessa, which is why they're trying to steal these territories and Russify them. Because the core territories of the Russian Federation are not nice places to live, and they're prone to collapsing. So it's not going to take much more. When you look at Russia's central banks currently being at 21%, the cascade of small business failures, double-digit inflation year over year for the last 3 years, it's so bad in Russia, they're putting sticks of butter in anti-theft cases because the average Russian is spending more than 50% of their take-home pay on just groceries, just having food to eat, never mind education, healthcare, or taking vacations. The average Russian is spending more than 50% of their take-home pay just to eat food every day. I don't want the people of Russia to suffer, but for some reason, this is Russia's greatest superpower, the willingness of the Russian people to suffer under their own government, under the czars, I don't know why they tolerate it. I mean, as a Westerner, this was my blindness, but when Russia invaded Ukraine, the first couple weeks of the war, I was just saying, we got to let the Russian people know what's really happening. Once the people of Russia understand and know what their government is doing, surely they'll take to the streets. Surely they'll rise up. Surely they'll put a stop to this. And boy, was I wrong. I was completely wrong about who the people of Russia are. It's dark. Who they actually are is really dark. And these are not people we want closer economic or political ties with here in the West. I'm just being honest, they share none of our values.
Okay, so that's interesting. That's new to me. Well, actually, real quick, when you say the banks in Russia are at 21%, do you mean interest rates?
Yes,
Okay,
so their prime interest rate, the equivalent of our Federal Reserve, is the Russian central bank. They're having to raise interest rates to get inflation under control. It's not helping, but they're at 21%.
yeah,
It's going to go
21%. That's
higher.
insane.
So to get a mortgage or to get a small business loan from a local bank, I mean the local bank's going to take their profits. You're paying closer to 30% for a car loan or a small business loan or a mortgage.
Yeah,
Like
no, it's
it's
that
insane
is
right now in
horrible. That
Russia.
is insane. So my professional background, I got a CPA out of school, and I did corporate finance for my master's. Um, I don't even work in that stuff anymore, but uh, I do. It does intrigue me a bit. So I was surprised to hear that. Actually, I knew that their currency was collapsing, but to circle back real quick on something that is new to me that you just said is that you thought when the Russian people, you know, figured out what was actually happening in Ukraine, they would rise up. When they figured out what their actual government was, they'd rise up. And this is something that I I'd say I really started my research into Israel and the history and the wars with the Arabs and everything like that 4 to 5 years ago at this point. And I was naive to I think what a lot of Americans think, a lot of Westerners think is, like this culture of people, they want the same things we want. Um, you know, they want, they don't want to live under these regimes that oppress gay people and women and minorities and all these sorts of things. Um, and something I kind of had to come to grips with was, um, well, a lot of these things they are okay with and they do support, and um, they really is just an anti-Western attitude and culture that is just ingrained into who who they are, at least at the moment. Um, I think people are people, that we're all the same still, but cultures are different, and cultures can be better or worse. And that was kind of one of those things I had to come to grips with. Where did you find that you might have been wrong about this Russian culture, and how did you learn that, hey, this isn't, these people don't think like we do? Because that is something that's kind of new to me that I haven't considered before.
I want to be careful.
Yes.
It's ironic. It's ironic that a Western value is to not want to impose your culture on other people, your values on other people. We do in a political process because we want to alleviate human suffering. LGBT rights in authoritarian regimes is an example. But I want to once again always be very careful. And I do genuinely believe this. There is no one correct way to live your life. No group of people should be imposing their values and beliefs on anyone else through force. And how the people of Iran choose to live their lives, how the people of North Korea choose to live their lives, even if it doesn't make sense to us, it's not necessarily wrong. There is no wrong way to be a human being and to live your life. Obviously, through your own filters internally, you can judge people, but I'm not in favor of ever pushing our values on other people through force. But that's what Russia's trying to do to Ukraine, and Ukraine's trying to reject that. So, let's see, where was I going with this? What was your question again?
No, you're fine. So, my question kind of revolved around, how did you learn that, the Russian people, how did you learn about the culture, basically? How did you learn that they were okay with the suffering and with what the regime is? Because, for example, you mentioned Iran.
So
Iran, oh
because
yeah,
the Russians look European, they look white. It's really easy to say, "Hey, I'm from North America, predominantly of European ancestry, white. Most of Europe, they're democracies, they're white." It's easy to see Russians on TV or on the internet and think these people have to be like us. They have to think like us. I can't remember who told me this. It might have been Danish naval officer Anders Puck Nielsen, but he says it'd be a lot easier, just if the Russians were purple, if they just completely looked alien to us, and we could think about them as being separate from the Anglosphere, the Western alliance of mostly European ancestry countries. This isn't true because obviously places like Japan and South Korea, they're capitalist and democratic. But if the Russians looked Middle Eastern or if the Russians looked Chinese, I think there'd be a lot less sympathy for them, amongst right-leaning groups here in the United States. But because they look like us, it's easy to be sympathetic to their narratives and their propaganda. A point I wanted to make about the modern era, the post World War II, I refer to this as the Bretton Woods Agreement era. This is not natural. This is not normal. I think the normal state for human civilization is autocracy. As soon as we started farming surpluses of food and building large cities and having advanced civilizations about 10,000 years ago, we've only had one form of government ever: autocracy, whether it was a military commander like Genghis Khan or a hereditary monarch. Power just naturally consolidates in the hands of one person or one family, and then you have territory. So this has been the natural state of man for 10,000 years. And it was the United States in 1945 that said, what if we tried doing something different? We've had a couple experiments with democracy, but what if we ended empires? What if we ended autocracies whenever possible, not through force, but if there's natural chaos and disorder and a country wants financial assistance to rebuild, we're going to give them a draft constitution and try and move them towards democracy. I just think when a country is a democracy and has free and fair elections and term limits, and the person in power eventually goes away, that country will have a higher standard of living for more people. It's about the most good for the most people. But I don't think this is natural for people. I think the natural tendency of humans is to want to consolidate power into one guy who will be your champion, who will be your fighter, who will be your protector. This is what people crave to a certain degree instinctively. And it takes education and it takes logic and rational thinking to reject that and say, no, 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 no. Let's have term limits. Let's have democratic leaders. Let's have peaceful transitions of power. And let's make government responsible to the needs of the people in order to benefit the most people. I think this is a good thing. But given that World War II ended now so long ago, we're just forgetting. We're forgetting what it was like before the modern era, when it was just rival empires and autocrats constantly going to war with each other.
No, that makes sense. Um, that makes a lot of sense, actually. I mean, there's a book. One of my interests, one of my things that have intrigued me over the years is evolution. There's a book called The Social Leap, and it talks about different types of leaders, and it compares elephants to, I think it was chimps. And chimps do kind of like, it's a very aggressive leader they want. They want someone that is the strongest and does kind of consolidate power kind of from the top down form, um, knowing that's a close ancestor of ours, or a close cousin of ours, not ancestor. That does make sense, actually. I mean, we mentioned, 10,000 years ago, we started farming. Um, we domesticated wheat, or wheat domesticated us, depending on who you ask. And from that point on, it went into autocracy. So that is an interesting point. And it is also an interesting point about how the Russians look like us. I can't remember which Russian it is, but there's a famous quote when they were asked, "Hey, are you European? Are you guys Asian?" And he goes, "No, we're Russian."
There are
They
people
really
out
don't for
there
sure.
who are anti-China but sympathetic to Russia when I can show you pictures and videos of Putin and Xi riding in the same military vehicle during joint military exercises.
Yeah,
How
yeah,
can
it
you
is.
be how can you be anti-China and sympathetic to Russia when I can show you pictures of their two autocratic dictators conducting joint military exercises together? What's
Yeah, it's wild.
what's
It's
the
wild.
difference?
And Russia has North Korean troops. Um, Although this isn't something that's really mentioned. Like, I see it mentioned on your channel. But it's weird. It's a weird thing how, um, something that the new right, as I call it, which Joe Rogan has become a part of, and there's lots of influencers, and just there's a shift going on in our own internal politics here in America. But the new right, one of the reasons they rose to such fame and status is because, hey, mainstream media is lying a lot, or they're leaving these details out. And then this is something that gets left out a lot now, and it's like, oh, all these same things are happening just with a new medium. But like, there's North Korean troops fighting in Russia. There's Yemeni mercenaries who, these same Yemeni mercenaries fight with the Houthis. And they're the same basically the same group, and the Houthi flag is on it. One of the four lines on it is "Death to America," and it's just like I don't understand how there is such a hey, everything's all fault here in the West. It's all because of NATO expansion or because the U.S. did this or the U.S. did that, and it's like I just don't think these people like us. I don't think they like our way of life. I think they're prone to dictatorships and autocracies, and just look at who their friends are. Look who they align with. Um, yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me. Is there?
How you consolidate power like these terrorist groups, rebel groups, whatever? I mean, it's easy to consolidate power by promoting an external threat. It's very easy for these factions or groups across Africa, the Middle East, or wherever, just saying, "Why are things in our country bad?" It's because it's bad because of America. If give me the power, give me the authority, consolidate around me, and I will stick it to the evil empire that has made everything in our lands terrible. People aren't looking for solutions. They're just looking for a conduit to express their rage and frustration. You know, for these Houthi rebels or whatever, why do you care? I mean, why don't you take some time and figure out how to make your own lives better, your own government better, your own country more prosperous? But I mean, they spend all their money on weapons, and it's just a death spiral of hate and ideology that I'll never understand. It's not my place to understand it. I do try to be sympathetic towards most people because people are people. We're not that different as far as our emotional wiring. And if
Absolutely.
I had been born there and I had lived through what they've lived through and experienced what they experienced and been exposed to the traumas and the propaganda and the generational hate, perhaps I'd be doing the exact same thing. It's hard to judge people when you've not lived the lives that they've led, and I'm not saying their lives are easy. Their lives have been very difficult, but the leaders they have are offering them a false vision, false hope that anything will change or anything will get better. They're just trying to consolidate power around themselves. They're the bad guys. They're the problems.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Uh, so again, to backtrack here, how does this war end? What does a Russian defeat look like? Um, is it just the overthrow of Putin? Does how far does Ukraine need to march east? What does the end of this war look like with a Ukraine victory?
We had a palace coup or palace coups during the Soviet era. You know, Nikita Khrushchev was the Soviet premier, and the Kremlin inner circle thought he was too weak. So they deposed him and they replaced him. I think it happened one other time. I'm blanking on the name. I forget which Soviet premier it was. So Putin, learning from history, created a structure in which nobody could ever challenge him. It's crazy to think that under the communist Soviet Union, there was more flexibility for replacing the guy in charge than there is in modern Russia. I've been waiting for this day for there to be a palace coup, and on Russian state TV, they start playing Swan Lake, and everyone is wondering what's happening. But oh, I mean, I guess yeah, there was a failed coup against Gorbachev as the Soviet system was collapsing, and nobody's doing it. Nobody is going to do it. I think I've given up hope that power players that still care about the Russian state and the future of Russia, anybody the last 3 years could have just eliminated Putin and taken power for themselves, and they probably would have gotten support from the West if they were willing to de-escalate the war. That outcome is always there. Putin knows this, that somebody could grab him or knife him in the back and then take power for themselves. And they probably would get a warm reception from the Western Alliance. So that's one outcome. The other one is much more brutal and deadly, and that's just the dissolution of the Russian state. Different provinces, Tatarstan, Chechnya, Dagestan, they all just say, we're not doing this anymore. We're not paying taxes. We're not sending any men to the SMO zone. We're not responding to any of the Kremlin's commands. And what does the Kremlin do when regional governors or regional warlords rise up and they say, we're not part of this system anymore? That's that's the nightmare scenario that Jake Sullivan as national security advisor is trying to avoid. I think this administration, the Biden administration, made a decision a long time ago. Under no circumstances is Russia allowed to collapse, which would mean a Ukrainian victory. But Russia can't collapse because then we would have the problem of loose nukes, regional warlords getting their hands on nukes, fighting over Russia's oil and gas fields, their diamond mines, their mineral deposits. Because when these new states appear, they're all going to have nuclear weapons and they're all going to be fighting over geographic territory for income. Under that scenario, potentially tens of millions could die. Hopefully, the nuclear war that ensues stays contained within the Russian Federation, but this is still not a good scenario for
Yeah, still
people
pretty
in the global
bad.
society. It's a possibility. And do I want that scenario? No. But the Russians are going to have to deal. They're gonna need help, and we're actually going to need China's help as well. China's military might have to go into certain parts of Russia to help secure nuclear weapons. And the question now becomes, is China going to give that territory back if Russia does destabilize? And then who knows? I mean, this nightmare scenario of Russia collapsing actually, I think, increases in probability now that Donald Trump is taking office.
Why do you think that?
Because Donald Trump doesn't think through his decisions too carefully, and Donald Trump, is a bull in a china shop. He can create positive, spectacular results, in certain aspects, but in other ones, he might accidentally cause, the Russian system to completely collapse in on itself. And I don't think we're going to have fewer wars the next 4 years. I think we're going to have more wars the next 4 years.
So hold on two directions I want to go with that. One is what more wars are coming. I actually think that as well. I kind of think that this kind of just no matter who the president is going to be, I think we're just kind of in that stage of, you can call it the fourth turning. There's a good book called The Fourth Turning. Um, Different people in different sectors and different industries call it different things. Um, but I just kind of think we're in that stage of just like kind of power dynamics and between globalization, deglobalization, different things of that nature. But also, what about Donald Trump makes you think he will lead towards a Russian collapse versus, I think the hope is from the libertarians. There's two sects of libertarians, but the mainstream libertarians are kind of the isolationist. Um, One of their famous voices that I talk about on here every time and time is Dave Smith. I think he represents their views well. I don't like Dave Smith personally, but I think he represents their views well. The hopes of getting behind Donald Trump was that he would, bring everyone to the table and say, hey, Russia's going to keep this, they're going to keep Crimea, basically. They'll keep Crimea and kind of the southern parts of Ukraine, and we'll sign a deal and everything's going to be happy and fine. That was their hope. So what makes you think they're wrong? And what makes you think that this could lead to disaster or the Russian dissolution?
Well, I want to say what's happening with Russia today has never happened before, in that a nuclear powered state, a state that has nuclear weapons, is making historical claims and demanding to redraw the maps of the world, or else they'll use a nuke. They'll either use a nuke against that country they're trying to conquer, or they'll use a nuke against a Western capital providing support. This is a new thing. This has never happened before. This is irresponsible. The world community, especially the other nuclear powers, countries like Pakistan, India, China, whoever, nobody should be tolerating this. This is unacceptable for a country with 6,000 nuclear weapons to say, we have historical claims to this territory. We want to redraw the international lines. And unless we get it, we're going to nuke people. It's blackmail. So if this works, if Russia gets away with this, the amount of nuclear proliferation in the world is going to become very dangerous for everyone. Because the other nuclear powers, India, China, North Korea, they now know this works. I can start talking about past historical claims, and I'm going to invade my neighbor and then tell the international community, stay out of it. Otherwise, I'll nuke you. That's not a peaceful, prosperous world in which I think benefits me. So the existing nuclear powers might become more aggressive. Any dictator in the world that wants to start talking about historical claims and invade their neighbors will now want to get nukes immediately because that's the cheat code. If you just have a nuke, you can attack anyone you want and take their stuff. That's the
Yeah.
ultimate checkmate. I'm sorry. If Russia succeeds today, and then there's going to be all the countries who no longer can trust France, the United Kingdom, and the United States. We're the three democratic nuclear powers. If we won't provide you with deterrence, if our nuclear umbrella does not protect you, well, now you need your own nukes immediately. Japan needs their own nukes. South Korea needs their own nukes. Australia needs their own nukes. Finland needs their own nukes. Poland needs their own nukes because you can no longer trust or rely on France, the United Kingdom, or the United States to deter people with nukes on the other side. Concerning China, it's a done deal. I think China has already made the decision. They're invading Taiwan in either 2026 or 2027. Doesn't matter what Donald Trump says or does. This is going to happen in the next 4 years on his term. All he can do is react. What is Donald Trump going to do when China invades Taiwan? And Taiwan is not some insignificant tiny island in the Pacific. It's over 20 million people. If Taiwan was a member of the European Union, it would be the fifth most populous state in the European Union. They're an economic powerhouse. They're a choke point, basically, for the global supply of semiconductors. If you want to fall behind as a nation in the race for AI and technological development, then do nothing when China invades Taiwan and takes their industry. So yeah, I think there will be more conflict. I will think there will be more wars the next 4 years if Russia is allowed to succeed in Ukraine. The only thing deterring and stopping any of this, the calculations, is if we continue supporting Ukraine, the Russians are defeated, the Chinese are deterred.
Gotcha. I mean, so why do you think? I know this isn't your expertise, but just to go off path and come back for a second, why do you think it's already said and done that China's invading Taiwan in 2 to 3 years?
So what is the motivation? I mean, let's roll back and say on a primal instinctive level, why is Putin doing this? Why did he invade Ukraine? Why is he demanding this territory back? And I think it has to do with language and culture. The autocrats who are most agitated at the moment, they have democratic neighbors with the same culture and the same language. So if you're an autocrat and you're corrupt, you're never leaving office, you don't care about the welfare of your states, you just want to buy more super yachts and more villas in Italy and launder your money through London or Switzerland, you've gotten away with it. Putin has gotten away with it. He will stay there for life. Except there's the problem. There are people who speak Russian in Ukraine. I don't know what percentage of the population day to day speaks Russian as their primary language, but it's high. It's greater than 30%. So if Ukraine is allowed to become a real, prosperous, democratic state, and the standard of living for the average Russian speaker in Ukraine goes up, well, now their cousins and neighbors on the other side of the border are going to be saying, why are we living in squalor? Why don't we have running water? Why is the HIV rates and drug use rampant in our country? Why is our government not responsible to us when the government in Kyiv is responsible to the Russian speakers in their territory? This is what Putin feared the most. This is why he had to deal with Ukraine today. If nobody in Ukraine spoke Russian, if they only spoke Ukrainian, which, by the way, the Ukrainian language is incomprehensible to the average Russian. They are not similar languages at all. The Ukrainian language is comparable to Polish more than it is to Russian. I don't think Putin would have done this because these dictators and autocrats have to control the narrative in their own language, their own sphere. So the same is true for China. China has to deal with Taiwan because Taiwan is a prosperous democratic country where the people speak Chinese. The reason why Taiwan exists is because China fought a civil war in 1950, or it ended in 1950. The National Party, they lost the civil war. They lost mainland China. They retreated to the island. And Mao Zedong had no way in the 1950s of assaulting and taking the island by force. So China, Xi Jinping He's emperor for life. He's never leaving office. The premiers of China are supposed to rotate every 10 years. And when he took over, I think in 2012 from Hu Jintao, he then spent the next decade consolidating power and destroying the Chinese system in which anyone would ever challenge him or try to remove him from the premiership. She is a dictator for life when that's not what communist China was intended to be going back 50 or 60 years. So there's this threat, this insecurity that the dictator has. There are people who speak Chinese on that goddamn island, and they have real responsive democratic government. The people have freedom of speech over there. They have freedom of press over there. That is a threat to me in Beijing. I need to deal with this. And the same is true for Kim Jong Un in Pyongyang. The reason why North Korea is a closed society and the most oppressed nation in the world. North Korea is the poorest, saddest, most effed up place in the world. But it's a closed society in which nothing gets in or out because of their democratic neighbor, South Korea. They speak the same language, the same culture. If the people in the North had the internet, if they had cable channels in which they could hear or see what life in South Korea was like, they would rise up and they would murder the Kim family. So for 70 years, North Korea has had nothing get in, nothing get out. It's a closed society. And the average person in North Korea only tolerates the Kim regime because they're told in propaganda that life in the South is worse. That despite how hard or difficult or miserable your life is in North Korea, the propaganda tells them it's worse in South Korea.
Hmm. No, that makes sense. I like that perspective. I haven't, again, another perspective I hadn't heard yet. There's a
It's
book
almost
called,
like people should have me on their podcasts, right?
people should have you on your on the podcast. You should be able to get. I mean,
No,
we're gonna get you to 20 to 30,000. Hopefully, actually, with your assistance, more views than that. But
I'll share this on the
yeah,
community tab, my YouTube channel. I bet we could get this to 100, but I mean, I've been making the argument and banging the drum on my channel, and I can't get these large podcasts. I mean, every effing podcast has had Tulsi Gabbard on or Andrew Bustamante, and I'm like, I think my hot takes on the world are a bit more interesting than theirs.
yeah. I mean, I don't think it's just you that's been. I don't know what the right word is. Blackballed isn't the right word, but for the lack of better reference, blackballed is like the pro-Ukrainian voices, the large pro-Ukrainian voices, which I'd say are 100,000 plus followers on any type of platform, which you have 500,000 on YouTube. That's enough. Like if you have 10,000 followers on X, you have enough to get on most platforms. If you have 100,000 plus, you have enough to basically get on any platform. In my
I can't get
couple
people to
years,
talk to me. I don't know
it's
why.
it is not just you having that issue as pro-Ukraine voices. Like Tulsi Gabbard, that makes sense. She's famous. I mean, she really rose to fame after the 2016 presidential debates, the Democratic presidential debates. Um, she she sunk Kamala Harris's battleship, which made her a Joe Rogan fan, and then I think was it Yang that was a fan, and just different people became big fans of her. Like, okay, you're gonna talk to her. I think her views are wild. And actually, my views of her kind of originated from an Israel standpoint, and
So on
she's a
Twitter,
hold the topic, but yeah.
this week, I sliced up clips from Andrew Bustamante's podcast with Lex Friedman. He was on Lex Friedman in August of 2022, and you can go to these podcasts from 2022, and you can see what these experts were saying about Russia and Ukraine 2 years ago, and they're all laugh out loud, comically wrong. I was right
Horribly wrong.
three
Yeah,
years ago what I was saying, and like I said, and to be fair, I mean, Western intelligence, all the experts were saying Ukraine has no chance. Russia's going to take everything over in 2 weeks. Blah blah blah. So they were just honestly, the the edgy counterculture, alternative viewpoint podcasts only had on people who were espousing mainstream views,
I
which is
know.
ironic.
It's crazy
Um,
how this happens.
and I've been saying, I've been saying for 3 years, Russia's not going to win this war. I'm actually more confident today than I've ever been that Russia's not going to win this war.
I am as well. Although I didn't start where you started. I didn't have any knowledge of this. I'm a big Lex fan. I mean, I haven't listened to a lot of podcasts since I started taking this one more serious and for things of that nature, but um, it's not full episodes. And next one of the guys that got me into podcasting, Andrew's the CIA guy. Is that who you're mentioning?
Yeah, Andrew Bustamante. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I watched him actually on. That was one of the voices I heard.
he's been on every podcast, every single one. Theo Vaughn, like every single one has had him on.
But they're wrong. They're wrong again and again and again. Laughably wrong, as you said. And I went from, okay, Ukraine can't win this war, knowing nothing, just taking in the sources that I like, um, as we all do, to the point of I can't really find sources that I like on this topic. And every time I watch people about it, talk about it, I'm like, okay, no, you're wrong. Because I've heard you say this before. I've heard you have these guests on before that preach this narrative. And for some reason, on this topic, there's a massive blind spot. And this is coming from somebody who I have family in Israel, a friend killed in the seventh. Like I had this, I have a clear and obvious bias, but I do my darn best to see both sides and talk to everyone, as many people as I can. And I see this massive propaganda machine work against Israel. But even Jews, even us, we at least get a spot at the table of, hey, we're gonna have this conversation. And it's just if we didn't have that, I mean, there would be no hope on the national on the geopolitical stage. But that doesn't happen in Ukraine, Russia. There is no. It's a very strange phenomenon how
It's
this.
very unfortunate that we have to take the narrative in this direction. Once again, I want to talk about defending democracy, human
Yeah.
rights, international
Yes.
law, the rules-based order. Those are good things,
Absolutely.
despite what all these podcasters guests talk about. But if we have to change the language and start talking about the trillions in untapped natural resources under Ukraine's soil, and we need to prevent Russia from taking them, we need the Western alliance to take these, or not take them, but partner with Ukraine to get them out of the ground. I'll make that argument. I'm shameless. I don't care. If we have to change our language to appeal to the broader MAGA power base that now controls the country, I'm for it. I mean, let's go ahead and make the dollar argument. Trump is transactional. Trump cares about dollars. MAGA cares about dollars. Let's make a deal. And I think Zelensky's there too. Zelensky will say to Trump, I will only partner with American companies to get oil and gas out of the ground once we expel the Russians. He'll say that. I think Zelensky will also talk in Trump's terms and make a deal. And as long as Ukraine remains sovereign and independent and they can expel the Russians and get their people and territory back, okay, that's not the path I wanted to take, but it still gets to the same endpoint.
Yeah. I also want to talk about those things: the democracy, rule-based order, um, and it's one of the things that really frustrates me when it comes to Israel is like there's such a perversion of those things that I care about so much that it's kind of gets flipped upside down when people talk about Israel. And these community national, not national, international rules-based order things just like completely fall apart, and you see how there's this authoritarian and Islamist and communist kind of cohesion into like, hey, we're all going to gang up on this thing because it's easy, it's Western, and it's vulnerable, and it's easy. Um, but yeah, no, I think even Lindsey Graham has changed his tone on how he's trying to convince people to go about this war with there's
Well, Lindsey
trillions of
Graham, of
dollars and
course, supports Ukraine, but
yeah,
you know, Lindsey Graham constantly lives in fear of being primaried. South Carolina is a deep red state. If Donald Trump were to support, endorse, or promote any primary candidates when Lindsey Graham is up for reelection, he's gone.
yeah,
So Lindsey Graham is just trying to remain relevant and keep his Senate seat. So it's fun to see him, shift around and be a chameleon. I know what Lindsey Graham really believes. I think he's still a colonel in the Air National Guard, so he still wears the uniform. And he understands the intelligence. He knows the geopolitical risks. He understands the need to respect the international rules-based order and defend democracy. But he also is a Republican in the year 2024, and he understands the cohesion currently and the momentum that MAGA has. So he has to ride with it, and I'm cool with him giving me talking points. How do you speak to Trump supporters to get them to
on board,
realize
yeah,
Russia is not your friend? Russia is not your friend. We need to
it's
be
hard.
helping Ukraine. It's in Trump and America and Trump voters' best interest to make sure that Ukraine wins this war. Whatever we got to say, I will say it.
Well, I appreciate you doing the work because we need to, and there's more people like you that need to, and it really does blow my mind. It's been one of the crazier things I've seen in the discourse of the geopolitical discourse over the last, I mean, 3 years really, but like it really just kind of came to a head over this last election cycle in America. Is that, I mean, goodness gracious, like Tim Pool, who is and Benny Johnson and all these people who are making $100,000 a week, I believe, from the Kremlin directly, um, for spouting off these just pure Russian propaganda points. And then when that comes out and everyone finds out, there's no change of course. There's no internal dialogue with themselves. It's I'm a victim, and Ukraine's still bad, and Russia's still good, or Russia at least is. They were forced into this whole thing, and everyone just goes along as normal. They weren't, excommunicated from this discourse, like, this particular discourse at least, and like they're still taken very seriously. And um, it's just like everyone that says the same things they say, the exact same things who aren't on the payroll, but they say the exact same things. Like Tulsi Gabbard, for example, who I believe is an American patriot. She served. I respect that. All those things. I just think her views are exactly aligned with people who are paid to talk pro Russian propagandist points. And it's like, but they're still taken so seriously. I just can't. I just don't get it.
Unfortunately, so what's happening today? What I think is happening is a majority of Americans are now getting their information and news from social media, not corporate media. The average person in America today, this is something that shifted. It changed over the last 4 years. People get their news and information from social media, not CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times.
Hmm.
Donald Trump refused to do a sit down interview with 60 Minutes on CBS. This was the first presidential candidate in like 60 some years who didn't do 60-minute CBS prior to the election. And, for people like Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, people in their who are 60 or 80, to them, that's, oh my God, Donald Trump won't sit down for an interview with 60 Minutes when he's a presidential candidate. And nobody cared. How many millions of views did Trump get on Joe Rogan or, or,
Oh,
or Lex
20
Friedman?
million plus.
That's the future. So the Democrats really, I mean, screwed up huge by not embracing this. And we can be honest, Kamala Harris was giving scripted answers because that was the formula for winning the last 70 years. In presidential politics, be careful what you say, run everything by a focus group, minimize your speaking time so you're less likely to make a gaffe, a binders full of women Mitt Romney moment or whatever.
Hmm.
And Donald Trump did the exact opposite. Just saying whatever he wanted, not running anything by focus groups, gaff after gaff, mess up after mess up. And I think Americans are okay voting for somebody who's flawed, somebody who doesn't know anything, as long as they think you'll still carry out the policies and issues that they care about. They don't care about your character or your uh, personality flaws or whatever. So I think for the Democrats, if they actually want to win in 4 years, lean into it. Run somebody who just talks and talks and talks. Now they're promoting Democratic the agenda or whatever. But if you screw up or say something stupid on a 3-hour podcast, and it's really easy over the course of 3 hours to say something stupid that can be turned into a 60-second attack ad, just keep moving. Just keep getting your message and your narrative out there. And there's a winning formula. Bernie Sanders is a winning formula. Economic populism. The elites in the Democratic establishments living, the donors who live in DC, New York City, and San Francisco, they hate Bernie Sanders. They reject the idea of the nominee or even people winning primaries who are economic populists. But I'm sorry, if you're going to defend the establishment, defend bureaucracy, defend special interest groups, you're going to keep getting wiped out. You're going to keep getting your asses kicked. The American people, that's the message from this election. We hate the establishment. We hate bureaucracy. We hate special interest groups. Donald Trump's not perfect, but he says he's going to destroy those people. And, if I'm not going to be winning economically the next 4 years, anyways, might as well make them uncomfortable. That's the takeaway. So in 4 years, I do think Democrats are going to adjust. They're going to embrace the podcast circuits. They're going to realize they just have to keep talking and talking. They're going to say stupid things. There's going to be attack ads, whatever. Just keep moving.
Yeah, no, I think um, I can go back and forth with some of that, but overall, I agree completely, and it's a different topic. A lot of people did call this the podcast election, and I really do think that if Kamala Harris just would have showed up on, I don't know if she could have because she does seem empty to me, like a suit, and I think I'm just an average voter in that
Well,
sense. But
here's the thing: is look at Kamala Harris's life as a black woman, Southeast Asian black mix woman. Uh, what does she have in common with Joe Rogan? Joe Rogan likes to bring on actors. He's an actor, and comedians. He's a comedian, and ultimate fighters. He's a former fighter. Joe Rogan brings on people that he has things in common with so that he can bond with them over a 3 hour conversation. Like these are very intimate experiences. But what does Joe Rogan and Kamala Harris have in common? Which is why Joe Rogan doesn't want to support Kamala Harris. People want to vote for people they think are similar to them. That's just human nature.
yeah,
So when I see Harris balk at the chance to sit down with Rogan, I mean, it could have been awkward. Like she could have sat down with him for 3 hours and they realized they don't have much in common and they're not getting along. And now it's on camera for 50 million people to see. Like, okay, I get it. I get why she didn't go on.
I I think it would have been awkward. One, I think it absolutely would have been awkward. I think she's kind of an awkward human, um, and there's not, like you said, there's not the thing to bond over.
So can I jump in and
Yeah, yeah,
identify
yeah.
what you're saying about her being an awkward human being? She's an introvert. Hillary Clinton was
Yes.
an introvert. Barack Obama was an introvert. Tim Walz is an extrovert. I think, and this is unfortunate because I'm also an introvert. I'm a high functioning introvert who had to get over his shyness and speaking problems. I mean, it took me a while to get good at what I'm currently doing. But for the average introvert, they're very capable. They're very smart. They're very focused. They're very engaged. They're high performers, but they're not gregarious. They're not sociable. They lose energy by talking to people and being around people. Whereas extroverts like Tim Walz, they feed on other people's energy. They get more amped up, more excited talking to people. If Tim Walz had been the nominee and he had gone on all these bro friendly podcasts, he would have crushed. He would have crushed. He would have won. But we had an introverted woman who, once again, very smart, very capable, who doesn't respond to people like that. It's just the biological nature of some people, and as an introvert, I understand it.
I understand it as well. I'm an extrovert. I definitely get energy from talking to people. I love meeting people and learning their stories, and I host a podcast. So like I love doing that type of stuff. But at the end of the day, you are a politician. It is your job to go talk to people, and if that's going to be your job, it's something you have to
It's
work on,
tough.
and there's things you got to do. And the largest podcast in the world, we can sit here and talk about how it is unfortunate that um, it really just speaks to humans like myself who are 20 to 30 something, maybe teenagers, 20 to 30 something, men who, into fitness and finance. And this is, that is the energy Joe Rogan brings. And that is why one of my friends, whatever it was, 8 years ago, said, "Hey, dude, check out this 40-minute thing." I was like, "Oh, who's Joe Rogan?" I didn't know him as a UFC fighter or whatever the fighting he did, or the Fear Factor guy. I didn't know him as that. I knew him as Joe Rogan the podcast, the first time I'd ever heard of him, and it did speak to me. I was talking about markets with Jordan Peterson, who I came to enjoy, and I think it's changed a bit, but I came to really enjoy his content, and another guy that was on there, and I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." And then he had a professor on, and then he had this guy on, and this, and it did very much speak to me. And this is how this grew. And it's you can talk. We can sit here and talk about, oh, it's unfortunate, like that's what's dominating right now. But I think I think what's going to happen over the years is there's going to be a lot more podcasts that have that get to the millions of views, you know, area, and it's going to even out, and there's going to be more, just like there's going to be more people who, whether it's Joe Rogan or Lex Friedman or, God forbid, more Tucker Carlsons and Candace Owens. But there's going to be more personality types that rise up, start getting these millions of views that millions of people connect with for some reason, and are great at what they do. And well, you make the whole circuit. So this way, you connect with the finance, fitness, bro guys. You connect with um, maybe the mothers or the 20, 30 something women or this and that, and you have to make those circuits, and that's going to be what it is. I hope corporate media has a place in there, because I do think corporate media, as much as I am a 20 something, as much as I hate the media, right? Uh, there's a place for corporate media that, even if I rose to Joe Rogan's level of fame, or Joe Rogan himself, or anyone else, we can't do what they should do, what they're built to do, which is fact check and have editors and do these deep dive investigations. Um, and I hope there's a reform there with a lot of. I hope there's an introspection of, hey, we lost trust with people, and it's for a reason, because there's going to be a place for that. And I think the New York Times podcast that they do is actually very well produced and very well done. Um, I hope more people start doing things like that, more corporate media start doing things like that, because there's a place for them there. Um, and it's going to look a little different, but everyone's going to look a little different. But either way, it's a whole other conversation we could have about who should have ran for the Democrats and what they should have done differently and this and that. But it's kind of another topic, and I don't know how much longer do I have you here for?
We can go a little bit longer if you want. Yeah,
Uh,
it's up to
I,
you, man.
I'm happy to. I'm happy to. I had this scheduled from 4 to 5 my time, and so I have about another half hour here. But um, on that note,
So
um,
I just want
yeah,
to point out George Bush was an extrovert, elected 2 times. Donald Trump, huge extrovert, elected 2 times. Joe Biden, he's old now, but if you remember younger Joe Biden, 60-year-old Joe Biden, huge extrovert. The guy was in government successful for over 50 years. Unfortunately, introverts in politics just have a handicap. They have a huge
absolutely,
handicap.
absolutely,
And I really think Democrats need to stop nominating introverts. Because they just don't have the energy when they're on camera. People don't feed off of it. They don't feed off people.
very true.
It's just, if you want to be Secretary of State and you're an introvert, nobody cares. If you want to be Secretary of Defense and you're an introvert, nobody cares. But I think for the top job, unfortunately, you need that E in your Myers Briggs personality.
Usually, like as you said, Obama did win. Although Obama was a general. I think you could also say this about Trump, in a different
So
way,
Obama
like
was
a
really good with
generational.
his rallies,
Yeah,
but when
incredible.
you actually talk to people who were in Obama's government, the guy never wanted to be in meetings. He never wanted to meet with people. Obama, did the speeches, did the rallies, was really good at it. But as actual president, he was kind of absent. Like he didn't want to meet with people all day and talk to people and take phone calls. Like behind the scenes, like publicly, he looked great. But what I've learned over the last 8 years since he left office is behind the scenes, he was completely absent. He just didn't want to do things because he was an introvert.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Um, I think yeah, there's just going to be a handicap for Democrats when it comes to presidential elections in that case. I mean, for a multitude of reasons actually, but one of the reasons is Democrats like to vote for the guy that looks like he reads books and looks smart and does those things, and Republican voters, they like to vote for the guy that looks like he likes baseball. Like George Bush. Like when I think George Bush as a young guy, I was truly a kid. I was born in '96, so I was truly a kid for when he was running, and
Wasn't he
he,
co-owner of the Houston Astros or something?
yeah, something like that. But like, he was literally just, to me, he just came across a guy that, this dude just likes baseball. Like one of my early memories of politics was George Bush throwing the first pitch in New York after the 9/11 attacks, and he threw a perfect strike. And like for whatever reasons, I have no idea how these parties came to be formed the way they are, and they are shifting a bit now. Um, but for whatever reason, the person that gets turned on by that is a Republican voter, tends to be a Republican voter. That's a true all-time American moment. Like when I think about all-time American moments for presidents, how does the perfect first pitch in New York City after a 9/11 attack not make it? Like that is just one of the things that comes to my mind. That's something that can
It
fire
was
up
pretty badass when Obama walked
super
down that
badass.
hallway and declared Osama bin Laden was dead.
Very badass. Very another awesome moment for sure. Like, yeah, I know for sure. But I think there's just a disadvantage there for Democrats. And I don't know if you can even pick up the way I lean. I'm a center left human. Actually, my first ever political test on the four grids, I was 17. It was my AP Gov class. We all had to take it. I ended up being dead center. We all had to put a sticker on where we landed after we took it. It's literally the dead center of that map. And since then, I think I've shifted a tad bit to the left,
Well,
just a
to
tad bit.
begin, America politically is handicapped because we have something called first past the post. A better version of democracy exists in countries like the Netherlands, where you have proportional representation in parliament. I think in the Dutch parliament there's 150 seats or something like that. But let's just say there's 100.
Hmm.
If you start a political party and you get 7% of the votes, you get 7 seats. You don't run candidates, you run as a party, and then you have a list of candidates, and let's say you have a list of 20, but you only get 7%, so your top seven get a seat in parliament. I think that's better because in countries like that, you have multi-party systems. 13 or 14 healthy parties that have a seat at the table. You have to build consensus and coalition governments to rule. Because of first past the post, anybody who voted for someone who came in third thinks they wasted their vote. So for over
Yes.
200 years, we've been handicapped where anybody who votes for the guy who came in third, and you're now at the mercy of the guy who came in first. So let's say we had an election in which somebody got 34% of the vote, somebody got 33% of the vote, and somebody got 32% of the vote. The guy who got 34 gets to rule and be in charge of everyone. And he only got 2% more than the guy who came in third. And a lot of the people who voted for the guy in third said, well, I think the guy who came in second would have been better. I hate the guy who came in first. So immediately off the bat of America's founding, we handicapped ourselves into this two-party system. The founding fathers didn't believe political parties would exist. They thought, we'd all be gentlemen and scholars and we'd be respectful and everyone would be independent minding. But immediately, literally, as soon as George Washington said he wasn't running again, actually, it was in Washington's first term that Thomas Jefferson resigned and then started the Jeffersonian Democrats. John Adams was the VP, and he was the leader of the Federalist Party. So it was Federalists versus Democratic Republicans. But then um, Aaron Burr killed Alexander Hamilton, and the Federalist Party basically died out. We then got eventually Andrew Jackson. Uh, we, since Andrew Jackson, basically, we've had Democrats and Republicans in some variation, two parties. Teddy Roosevelt, very popular president, tried to break that mold with the Bull Moose Party and failed. We had the Whigs briefly in the late 1800s. They failed. So it's just impossible. And where I'm going with this is that when you describe your own political beliefs, you can't be just left or right. Like you can't just have a black white or a true false or a bipolar opinion on any array of issues. So we all have our issues that we care about more than other issues, but because we have to join a tent, we have to either join the
Yes.
Republicans or we have to join the Democrats. We end up adopting positions that we wouldn't have adopted otherwise.
Absolutely.
Like if I vote for Democrat, do I have to be, pro-choice? Do I have to be supportive of LGBT rights? Do I have to be all these things? And you kind of just do it because there's maybe one issue you care about. Maybe I want to see the minimum wage raised, or I want to see the environment protected. So I just kind of like take on all of these other issues that everybody else in the party cares about because I'm trying to be a team player. But that's not healthy. It's not normal. That's not natural. I think there's lots of people who voted for Trump for lots of reasons, and they're taking the Republican position on guns or abortion or whatever because those are their people. They're fighting
Yeah,
together to
no,
stop the other side.
absolutely, absolutely. So you're speaking the teenage 20 something language. So like my first kind of like attitude towards politics coming of age was I hate the two party system. Um, I briefly was a fan of RFK when he was rising, when he hit 20% in the polls. I was like, oh my God, this guy could do something. I was a huge fan of that because my thought was, along with a lot of other people's thoughts at the time, was, well, if this guy wins a handful of states, makes a real run at things, maybe we get a third party out of this. Maybe the Forward Party adopts him or something. All these other, like maybe something happens out of this. And what it
It's a
ended up
pipe
actually,
dream.
yeah, and then what ended up actually happening was most of these people that I kind of formed this little coalition with of online friends, and and some of them are fantastic. I mean, most of them are fantastic humans. One of them, he's a kid named Holden. He's like 23 years old, and he gained tens and tens of thousands of followers since this whole thing began. Elon Musk retweets this guy now. He's a huge RFK guy. Um, but one of the things that we bonded over was like, oh, dude, we could get a third party out of this. Like, this is a real possibility here. And he ended up being a MAGA guy at the end of the day or Maha guy. He's a Maha guy, but he ended up being a big Trump guy because that's the way they went. It's like, oh yeah, this is just the way it devolves into every time. It just evolves into so quickly.
Here's the insane thing we've learned the last 10 years. We don't need a third party. If you want, just overthrow the establishment of one of the current two parties and make it your own.
Yeah,
Love or hate Donald Trump, what he accomplished since 2016, destroying the establishment of the Republican Party. I mean, he has the formula there. Like, if you hate the Democratic Party establishment and you want to change the status quo, just primary everyone. Anybody in the Democratic Party you think is not going to represent you, primary them and get. There's not that many people who vote in primaries, and Republican voters, especially with the Tea Party movement of 2010, they figured this out. I can't remember what election cycle Eric Cantor lost, but Eric Cantor was like the minority whip or something. This was like 2012. This was the third highest ranking House Republican, also Jewish, and he lost his primary for nothing, for no reason. It was just the Tea Party saying we want more forceful, aggressive, adversarial people. So if the Democrats actually care about certain issues and want to fight, just start primarying all the establishment people and get real fighters in there who will advocate for what you want and push what you want. Will that lead to more polarization and division? Blah blah blah. Okay, yeah, but I mean, the other side, the Republicans are already there. I don't call Republicans anymore because the Republican Party I've known my entire life is gone. It
it's so
died
different from what I
when
even know.
it died when John McCain died in 2018. The Republican Party was kind of still there in Trump's first term. You had Mike Pence, the governor of Indiana, as VP, and you had Reince Priebus, the RNC chair, become Donald Trump's chief of staff, and you had it there the first term, and all those people are gone. Donald Trump ended all of their careers. It's funny to watch, but what I'm saying is we don't need a third party. If you're unhappy with the Democrats and you hate MAGA, just take over the Democratic Party. Just take it over. As long as we're having free and open primaries, it's not that hard to do. It just happened. So yeah, the factions are realigning. The MAGA party that exists today is nothing like the Republican Party I've known my entire life. They have a completely different kind of anti-business, pro-populist. Um, we don't really care about the national security apparatus. Like it's insane that Democrats are the one trying to argue we should be spending more on defense. And Elon Musk just this week said we need to slash the U.S. defense budget. And Bernie Sanders is tweeting out, I agree with Elon Musk. This is a great idea. Let's take a chainsaw to the national defense budget. Could you imagine any Republican saying this even 10 years ago? But wow, that's where we are today.
Yeah, no, that is
They're talking about taking away veterans' health care. They're talking about, slashing the VA budget. Like, this is so many insane things that I think they're going to actually do, because why would the Democrats put up resistance? It's the Democrats who are the ones my entire life saying, why are we spending so much on defense? So we'll see how veterans and the national security apparatus of America reacts if any of this actually starts going to votes.
um, well, I hope it doesn't. I hope those things don't go to votes. To backtrack 5 minutes here, one of the things that we can change about our system, one of the things that also very much attracted me to the Forward Party and Andrew Yang, back when I still had the dreams of a third party, was this ranked choice voting. That way, so the example that you brought up of 34, 33, 32%, well, if the majority of those 32% that got third, their guy got third, if they put as their second choice the guy that got 33%, and all of a sudden this guy, you just kind of eliminate the lowest tier, go to their second
States can
choice.
do this.
Yeah,
Any state can amend their constitution and start immediately doing this for state elections, and I think it would be fantastic.
it can be better.
I
I
think
think
there are I think there are some states that do have ranked choice voting. I don't know which ones, but I do think there are a couple that have already amended their constitution and they do this now.
I did not know that. I'll have to look that up. Yeah, there's little things like that that we can do. I don't want an overhaul of our system. I don't want a revolution. We live in a great country, and we need to just spread democracy as much as possible and as far as possible. Which I think you and I are very much aligned on there. Uh, but yeah, no, it is crazy. It is crazy just how everything has seemed to flip over these last 8 years. I call it the new right. Um, it's definitely not the old Republican Party, and it is wild being.
Okay,
I mean,
so
yeah, older, yeah.
I googled it. Maine and Alaska
Alaska,
have ranked choice voting.
Maine, and Alaska. That
Cool.
makes
I mean, let's see if we can get some bigger states to adopt it.
yeah.
People just kind of like need to get used to the idea. They always complain when anything changes, but as soon as something changes and you realize it's better, well, then you stop complaining.
Yeah, absolutely. People hate change. We hate change. We're very uncomfortable with it. Um, but man, it would force people to the center. It would force candidates to the center instead of forcing them to the edges,
Yep.
which is really scary to me. Because like so you said an example that um, if you don't like the Democratic Party, well, we have a model now. Do the Trump model and just overthrow it. Just primary everybody. When I look at Trump, what scares me uh, is the precedent he set for, hey, here's how you undermine America's democracy. Uh, you just do it through this huge pop. And I'm not saying Trump wanted to do that. I'm not saying Trump's the evil guy. But let's say there's an evil person around my age or their 40s or whatever it may be. It's like, you know what? I have the means to do this. I want to do this. Um, I'm going to start running by saying the establishment is just pure evil. How do I do that the best way possible? Um, okay, the president wasn't even born here. That I'm going to go with that one. And now I'm going to get this coalition of a cult following of anything I say at this point is going to be agreed with. I'm going to have my army behind me because I already have the craziest lie, and they're just going to believe me no matter what. And so I'm going to go with that. I'm just going to build momentum, build momentum, build momentum. Um, Hopefully capture office. When I capture office, I'm just going to say, hey, this next election is going to be rigged. I mean, he was doing it in 2016 too, but this next election is going to be rigged, and I'm just going to convince them all. There was a good narrative this in 2020 of the voting machines are rigged, the mail-in voting is rigged, and you shouldn't do it. So I'm going to be ahead when you go to bed, and when you wake up, I'm behind because all the mail-in voting is actually fraud. And we need to overthrow the system. And you could overthrow an election that way. I'm not, and, led to January 6th and all of that, but if there was a real intention to overthrow an election, and hey, do not give up. Uh, this is all rigged. If this would happen in 2040 or 2050, but the person's real intention is truly, I want to undermine this democracy. I've had people on this podcast even say, nope, you're crazy. So you may say the same thing, but no, the more I think about it, like, nope, no, this is possible. Like the 2050, there's a 2050. If someone just looked at this playbook, someone evil, they said, looked at this playbook and said, I want to do this, but I want to do it for real. You could do it, and it's like that. I didn't think that was possible in America, and that truly, more than anything about Trump, terrifies me. Is like, oh my gosh, like if that was his intention, again, I don't think that was his intention. I think he's a guy that likes to win. I think he's a guy that got, um, in some aspects, treated unfairly. In some aspects, this is exactly who he was. Um, but he didn't like being slandered. He didn't like losing. He's had a lot of grudges, and um, he's a guy that likes to fight and all those things. But if you had someone that
Ev-
was more Hitlerite or Stalinite, there's a path. There's a playbook to how you do that in America now. And that does scare me.
Every everything is a conspiracy when you don't understand how anything works.
Yes.
So concerning our election system, I'm actually very comforted by the fact that we have, federalism, in which the federal government doesn't manage our elections; state governments do. So, how do you rig an election? Well, you could rig an election in one individual state, but you can't rig 7 battleground states at the same time without anybody noticing. For people saying we need recounts, maybe there was something wrong with this election. Kamala Harris actually won, but Donald Trump somehow stole it. Anybody saying that doesn't understand that the states run their own elections. And we have Democratic governors and Democratic secretaries of states running these state elections. So why would they rig it to have Donald Trump win? And then there's people in MAGA saying the exact opposite, that because the Democratic governor in North Carolina won, but then Trump won North Carolina, and the Democrat senators in Michigan and Wisconsin and Nevada all won, but Trump won those states. So if even people in MAGA are saying the election was rigged because they lost the Senate and governorships, and no, there genuinely just is split voters. There's a very small fraction of people, 1% of the population, who decided to vote for Trump for president and for their incumbent Democratic senator because they like the person and they didn't know who the other guy is. Or you leave the top of the ticket blank and then vote straight Dem down because you didn't like Harris, or you
Yeah.
vote
North Carolina is a good
Trump for the
example
top,
of
and then
that.
you leave the rest of the ballot blank. There's lots of ways to
Yes.
get to these
Yes.
mixed outcomes for the states, but nothing is rigged, and people need to stop talking this way. It's coming from both sides, and it undermines and hurts our democracy.
It is coming
And
from
for
both
people who
sides.
promote these, they're idiots and they don't understand how our elections work.
It is coming from both sides. I agree. And I think it's going to temper down. It did temper down this time. There are still people saying that Kamala won the election, and still including some decently prominent people. But it's much less. There was even a study that came out that it went from like something like 40% of Democrats in 2016 to like 80 something percent of Republicans in 2020. I thought it was rigged to 10% of Democrats this time. Hopefully that holds. Hopefully that drops. Um, so I do think it's reversing. But my point of like the cult doesn't care. If you build a cult of a following, a cult type of a following, they don't know they don't know how this works. They're not going to learn how this works. They're going to hear about your story in the voter fraud in Georgia, or this story here in Pennsylvania or Georgia, whatever it may be, and they're going to think, oh my God, the election stolen. You have millions of people think this election was stolen. We have to go save our democracy, and you overthrow the democracy doing that. It's I can see how this happens now in America. I never once in my life before 2020 could have seen how that happens in America, because I'm with you. These elections aren't rigged. 2016, 2020, 2024, these are not rigged elections. Uh, like you, I think one of the best examples of that, one of the best like pieces of evidence you can use is these aren't even federally ran, as you said. Every state is running their own election. You just can't do this. Trump, even to Trump's credit, which like I don't know if this guy genuinely thinks he won in 2020
No,
or
he's
not.
lying. He doesn't believe he won.
He might
He
he
said
might
on
think
Lex Friedman that he lost. Like, we have him on camera. He's on the
did
Lex
he find
Friedman
it?
podcast saying that he lost by a whisker. He said it.
Yes,
And
he did.
then
Yes, he
and
did.
then he decided to say, "No, I never said that." You
Yes.
said it on camera.
Um, it's crazy. It's like to his credit, something I never would have known about, or is like how this all works if he didn't go through the 64 court cases where he lost 63 of them, and like It's like, okay, you clearly, and then Steve Bannon's recording that came out
Here,
saying like, oh,
here's
here's this
here,
man.
here's the truth, Troy. If the 2020 election was rigged and Donald Trump actually won, then in the last 2 years, Speaker Johnson, as Speaker of the House, would have had hearings and presented evidence, brought in experts, and even issued subpoenas or arrest warrants or whatever. Like the fact that Speaker Johnson and Republicans controlled the House the last 2 years and they held zero hearings, they held zero investigations about the 2020 election means that everyone in the Republican establishment knows it wasn't rigged, but they continue to promote it or repeat what Donald Trump says because they think it benefits them. That's unfor
And that's
so
scary to me.
cynical.
See, that's scary to me. Like that's the thing. It's like, okay, I think this is how you can fall into corruption. It's like, again, before 2020,
Same.
honestly, before even like
And
2021, 2022, when I really looked back at all of it, I was like, this could never happen in America. But if you have half of the Congress, half of our government falling in line, like DeSantis never had a chance to win, in my opinion, because half of the people he needed to vote for him, he had to tell them Trump won. And then, well, if Trump won, why are you running against him? Because he had to run on being a winner. And it's like, I was like, dude, this is just a wild predicament that this new right party is in. The red team
I
is in.
well, it's both sides, but it's worse on Republicans and MAGA. But we've entered this post-truth period in which facts don't matter. Politics is now being treated like professional wrestling. You have a fighter that you cheer for, and it's all fake. It's all theater. And people say, I want my side to win, and this is now the public arena. There's a very informative video. Maybe I'll send you the link on the YouTube channel Wisecrack, in which they talk about kayfabe. And kayfabe is a term from professional wrestling, like the WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment. And you have fighters that have these personas, and they never break character. The Undertaker, Hulk Hogan, whoever,
Yeah.
when they make public appearances, they never break character. They say in this persona about how the upcoming fight is the most important thing in the world, and they're gonna crush them, and they're gonna get revenge because their girlfriend was insulted or something stupid. This is how people on the lowest tiers of education in America think and react and respond. They respond to emotion. They respond to strength and weakness. They don't logically think things through, and honestly, they enjoy it. They think politics is more fun and more interesting and easier to engage with or participate with when you have these grand conspiracies and narratives, dark, shadowy figures. In 2016 with Pizzagate, that somebody in a pizza shop was shot by a Trump supporter who thought that children were being abducted and then sexually assaulted in the basement of this pizza shop. This was the conspiracy promoted by MAGA in 2016. And this pizza shop didn't even have a basement. Like, there's just a million stupid examples such as this. The Clintons, I forget who they murdered in the 90s or whatever. Like, this was always there as an undertone, but because we had gatekeepers, we had corporate media, it could never rise to the surface. But with the advent of the internet and the budget production capability of individuals going down to just a single iPhone, anybody who wants to participate, promote, join in can do so. There are no guardrails, there are no controls against conspiracies, misinformation, people lying. And unfortunately, I think people enjoy it. I think they enjoy, the WWE-ification of our politics, and it's never going to change. It's never going to get better. The famous movie Idiocracy. Have you ever seen Idiocracy?
Yeah, it's been a while, but
Yeah,
yes,
Terry
it's funny.
Crews is president of the United States, and he talks and acts like a professional wrestler.
Yeah,
Idiocracy was supposed to take place, hundreds of years in the future, and it's about eugenics, but it's shocking how fast we got there. And we got there because of social media, because of technology, because of the entry barrier for people contributing their voice going down to just, their iPhone and TikTok accounts. It's we need to understand what has changed and we have to adapt. We will adapt. The culture here in the United States, the political culture is never going to stop changing, never going to stop evolving. But the period we're in might last a generation before we grow out of it or adapt to a new model.
Well, I hope that's not true, but the genie is out of the bottle, and anyone now can rise to fame and just kind of influence the needle 1% this way, 1% that way, and I think it needs to be people like yourself. And so I'm trying to get our message out here, your message out there as best I can. I would love to stay in contact with you and keep up with you and see how the journey goes and have you back on all those great things. But we are at 2 hours here. We're at 5 p.m. my time. So I do have to run here in a second. But thank you so much, Jake, for coming on. It's been great getting to know you. I want to get to know you more. Thank you for what you're doing as on your message with Ukraine. In my mind, everything you've brought new things to my attention. Like, oh my God, great points that I haven't thought about before. I know I'll have to rewatch this and ponder and talk to my friends again. And but I really appreciate what you're doing. Truly, in my mind, it's all it makes perfect sense. It's morally clear. And I don't know why we don't have more people like yourself out there fighting that fight. So thank you so much. And again, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on, Troy. Best wishes.
Absolutely, absolutely. Have a good one, sir.